All right, Alexander, let's talk about US inflation. Good, bad, really bad. What is the situation going on in the United States? Because the Biden administration would want everybody to believe that they've got this thing. Actually, I saw an interview with Biden the other day, and he was like, "Look, you know, things are okay, everybody. Nothing to see here. We've got everything under control." But the real numbers, and I want to stress the real numbers, I think are painting a very different picture. What do you see here?
Absolutely. I mean, can I just say straight away? I mean, the inflation readout we got was bad. In fact, it's really bad. To answer your question, is it good, bad, or really bad? It is really bad. It is showing that inflation is still on a strongly rising trajectory. Now, I am as skeptical about the actual headline figures as many people are. I mean, you have people who say these numbers are too low. I am absolutely of that view. There are people like John Williams at Shadow Stats who give entirely different numbers, much higher numbers. I'm not a statistician. I'm not going to go there. I'm simply going to say I'm not going to comment on whether John Williams is right, whether his figures are indeed the correct ones. I don't have that kind of mathematical or statistical skill, even though I did study statistics once upon a time, but that was a long time ago. But the point I'm trying to make is this: regardless of what you think the true rise in prices in the United States is, it is indisputable that prices are rising, and that they're rising fast, and that they're rising faster, much faster than the administration promised, has repeatedly promised and expected, and that this rise in prices is now expanding to involve more and more goods and also services as well. So it's becoming broad-based. The only thing that has slowed the rise in prices slightly is the fact that the administration has been working very hard over the course of the summer and autumn to try to put some kind of ceiling on oil prices. They've depleted the United States' strategic reserve to apparently dangerously critical levels. I mean, I'm not the only person saying that, many people are. And they've done various other things to try to restrict the rise in energy costs, which is particularly sensitive in the United States. More and more people, however, expect that oil prices, energy costs are going to start rising soon as well. And we've now had the OPEC production cut, which came as a shock to the administration. We've got more indications that as winter closes in, especially as they press on with this oil price cap idea on Russian oil, that oil prices are going to start surging. And of course, there's a limit now to how far they can go on depleting their strategic reserve. So oil prices are going to start rising. That's going to add another further twist to the general rise in prices that we are seeing. So inflation in the United States, all the indications are that it's going to go on climbing. And bear in mind, this is a time of year when the trend in prices anyway tends to be upward, even in good times, where, with Christmas coming, with people shopping, with people wanting to buy things for Christmas, it usually is a time when demand is higher and therefore prices are higher. And of course, energy costs are anyway higher because of the cold weather and that kind of thing. So we're going to see higher inflation in the United States over the next few months. And of course, it is very high. Inflation is much higher than it has ever been in the United States, unless you reel all the way back to the early 1980s. And it's important to stress that the reason this is so is because of the policies that the administration is following. Last year, they attempted to raise the growth rate in the United States by embarking on a massive spending program. They were going to run the economy hot, which is, we said at the time, if you go back and look at the programs that Alex and I did on the Duran, that we were doing on the Duran last year after the administration came to office. We predicted that it would result in much higher prices, and much higher inflation. It's impossible to do what the administration was trying to do last year without inflation rising. And we said it wouldn't be transitory. And sure enough, it hasn't been. And then they've compounded these problems by adding to the already existing supply difficulties, but doing so in a massive way by launching this huge economic war against the Russians, the world's biggest commodity producer. You know, they may not be the biggest producer of a particular commodity, but if you're talking about the whole range of commodities, they are the world's biggest commodity producer. And of course, that economic war continues. It's adding to the supply difficulties, and it's causing inflation to go up even further. And the Federal Reserve Board is left trying to chase this runaway train. It's frightened to raise interest rates too fast, because if it does, that might crash the economy, and they don't want to be blamed for it. But at the same time, trying to keep up with this runaway inflation train is very, very difficult. And they're now caught. There's lots of criticisms of them. I was reading in The Guardian today in Britain, complaints about the Fed raising interest rates too high. Nobody says what should be done to bring this inflation under control.
Well, there's nothing they can do now, is there? I mean, the whole goal was to try and do something before the midterms, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that train has left the station now. So whatever's going to happen going forward is, you know, the Democratic Party is going to be looking at 2024 now.
Yes.
I mean, they've missed the midterm opportunity. They tried, they depleted the strategic reserves. They went to Venezuela, they went to Iran. We know now that they went to Saudi Arabia, and they even begged Saudi Arabia to wait, not to forego cutting production. They just went to Saudi Arabia and said, "Look, just wait one more month until after the midterms, and then do what you want."
Yes.
And Saudi Arabia completely snubbed them. So, you know, there's going forward. This is going to be the accepted trajectory of things, isn't it? I mean, this was everything they were doing was for the midterms. That's over now. So
Absolutely.
just let it go now. Let it
Absolutely.
let it run.
I mean, can I just comment on the Saudis? Because I think this has been, again, much misunderstood and just discussed, misunderstood problem. There's been a general rise in prices, not just of oil, but general rise in prices. That's what these inflation numbers are telling us. What was happening, because the administration was trying to hold down oil prices, is that oil prices were falling back even as other prices were growing. And of course, the Saudis didn't like that, because they say, look, price of oil may be high, but it's falling even as the cost of our imports is rising. So it's unsurprising that the Saudis at that point said, enough's enough. You're also experimenting with these dangerous ideas about trying to control the price of oil, the Russian price of oil, but that could be done to us as well. Enough's enough. In light of this, we feel that oil prices need to be supported so that they can keep up with the general rise in inflation, which you in Washington are creating, so that we can balance our own books more effectively. That's the Saudi thinking here. They're acting in their own interests. They're not prepared to bail the Democrats and the Biden administration out. And you're absolutely right. The United States has knocked on one door. I should say, not the United States. The administration has knocked on one door after another. They've gone to the Venezuelans, who can't produce more oil. They're not in a position to. Even if all these sanctions were lifted tomorrow, they can't produce more oil at this time. Their oil industry is in chaos to some extent because of the sanctions that the US imposed on them. There's been a lot of mismanagement too, or so I understand. But the fact is, one way or the other, they can't produce the oil that the United States needs, nor can the Iranians, nor can anyone else. So, as you rightly said, the train has left the station. There's no way they can turn this round before November, 8th November. It's not happening. The only thing they can do, the only trick that they've got left in the book is that they can blame everyone else. They can say this is the Saudis. They've got into an alliance with the Russians. Putin is, he's manipulating this thing. If you vote
The
for
Republicans.
the Republicans, exactly. If you vote for the Republicans, you're really helping Putin. I mean, that's the only card they've got left to play. I don't believe the American people are going to buy that. By the way, just to let everybody know, we're doing a program with Robert Barnes. I think it's tomorrow. You can confirm that, Alex. He's the person who's going to help us understand where we are with the midterms. I saw recently, I think the other day, a long piece in the Financial Times of all places, ardent supporter of Biden and the Democrats, as that newspaper is. And they're now saying that Democrat hopes in the summer that they were going to hold their ground in the midterms are now melting away, and that it looks like a Republican landslide. But we'll wait for Robert Barnes to help us dissect what's actually going on and find where it's coming. But you're absolutely right. It looks to me that in terms of economics, the cost of living, inflation, the state of the US, the state of the collective West, the state of the American families struggling to cope with their household budgets, the Democrats now are shot under the waterline. They're holed under the waterline. The Biden administration ship is sinking. They're going to have a hostile Congress very soon.
So I wonder how funding Ukraine is going to fit into all of this. I mean, on the one hand, you can make the argument and say, okay, things are going so bad that the only thing that's going to distract away from how bad things are is a conflict, right? Okay, so you can make that argument. That's a valid argument to make. But on the flip side, it's the American people that aren't going to buy into any of that. They're not going to believe it. They're not going to put up with it. And every time they see, now going forward, every time they see the Biden administration escalating, sending money to Ukraine, or even possibly getting more involved in Ukraine, I imagine the American public's going to be like, stop. We don't want any part of this. Why are you sending $1 billion, $5 billion, $10 billion to Ukraine when our economy is a complete mess? I mean, I think that's the more likely scenario than, we're going to start a conflict and we're going to distract people away from this, and we're going to focus on some faraway war in Ukraine with Russia. I think that's even left. That train has also left the station. They might have been able to do something like that way, way back in the beginning, when everyone was still, Ukraine's the new thing. It's the new cause. We're all with Zelensky and did all of that stuff. But I think over the past 7-8 months, the enthusiasm has faded. People are sick of seeing the money go to Ukraine while they're not getting any of the money to help their own community, their own well-being. And the Biden administration won't be able to do something there either. They're going to have to actually pull back on their support for Ukraine as well, I imagine. And I would also say the Republicans also won't be able to go the warmonger route, the Lindsey Grahams and the Mitch McConnells. I imagine they're going to be hesitant to go the warmonger route. That would be my guess. I could be wrong, but
well, I have to say that is also my assessment, actually. I mean, looking at the situation, and I mean, the first thing to say is that apparently the administration was allocated more money by Congress to use to support Ukraine than it has spent, and that the time frame for spending that money that he didn't spend is actually gone. So it's about $2 billion, not a huge amount relative to what they've thrown at Ukraine. But that apparently is a recognition that shoveling money at Ukraine is becoming a very, very hot topic. And it's not playing well, apparently, on the doorstep as the midterms loom. So one does sense that things are beginning to, wind down over this desire to support Ukraine. And you're absolutely correct. The Republicans are hardening against this, but I think some Democrats are too. I mean, there was an extraordinary film that I saw. I'm sure you saw it as well, of AOC, of all people, addressing some of her devoted fans. And first of all, it was a pretty sparse turnout. Once upon a time, halls were brimming with young progressive people hanging on every word of AOC's. Well, not many turned up. And of those that did, many of them were heckling her because of her support for Ukraine and sending arms and money and things like that to Ukraine. So I think this is proving an increasingly hard sell in the US. I think the administration knows it. And by the way, on that, there are reports, and these come from Ukrainian channels, that the administration has been piling on the pressure on Zelensky and on the Ukrainians to capture Kherson before the midterms, to at least show that there is some victory. Something is being achieved in Ukraine. And one of the results was that Ukraine has been, throwing more troops and trying to take Kherson. They tried again over the weekend and they got battered. and, and that makes complete sense to me. But, like yourself, even if they were to capture Kherson, which I don't expect, by the way, even if they were, I don't think it would make any difference to the perspective of American voters. They are fed up with Ukraine. They're fed up with the administration. They see the president completely detached from reality, more interested in Ukraine than he appears to be in the United States itself. And unlike Europe, there remains political vitality in the United States. There remain voices in the United States which are prepared to challenge the deep state orthodoxies, and we can see the pushback. And I think that's going to gather steam. I think after the midterms, if there's a Republican landslide, the balance within the Republican Party will probably shift to a more anti-war position. And when the next Congress comes in January, I think we will start to see that this already diminishing flow of support for Ukraine is going to essentially stop. That's what I think.
Yeah, that's why a lot of analysts, including some military officials in Belarus, were claiming that they see a February timeline for all of this to wind down in Ukraine.
Yes.
So
I
it
agree.
kind of fits. Yeah.
It makes sense.
All right. Yeah. All those billions to Ukraine. Can you imagine the good that money could have done in the United States for the people of the US?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I have to say this. I mean, if you track the administration and its language as closely as we do, it's two things come across. They've got two obsessions. One is Ukraine, Putin, Russia. I mean, they are obsessed with it to an unbalanced extent. The other, I have to say, this is Donald Trump and MAGA. I mean, they're obsessed with that within the United States. Then they see their approach to both in entirely confrontational and very belligerent terms. And I don't think the American people and the critical mass of the American people share in those obsessions. And we're going to see that in November. And I think, as you rightly say, come January, come February, the whole mood is going to shift.
Okay, we will end it there. The Duran.locals.com. Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY as written on that mug. And also look for us on Rockfin as well. I will have a link to that down below. Take care.